Dear friends, I thought in the meantime, for the next 3-4 minutes, while we are still waiting for Dr. Seremi to join, I thought I'll basically introduce what we have been doing and give the disclaimer so that we can begin as soon as he joins. We initiated this framework of the Web Seminar series on the essence of life and growth, primarily with a objective to bring in positivity to life and outline and highlight the basic positive contributions one can make and one can achieve by looking at life and growth both positively, independently, and together. And we're happy that we've had a large number of speakers since the 15th of April when we started this. We had Professor Arun Kumar, who has been a professor of JNU, is now currently the Malcolm S. The chair professor at the Institute of Social Sciences. He talked about the contribution, the collaborative efforts in terms of trying to achieve goals for growth as well as life. Then we had a young BJP national leader, Mr. Vaibhav Agarwal, on the 16th, where he spoke about the way life is not a balance sheet. He talked about the pros and cons of what's happening, what different governments are doing. He gave the idea of his government and so on and so forth. Then we had on 17th of April, we had Dr. Kai Sunderlund. Kai has been the former ambassador to India for Finland. He has been a diplomat all through. He has also been advisor to the Prime Minister of Finland. And then he spoke about the way one needs to balance out things, look at the lighter side and the better side of life, and giving out his experience in different countries. Then we had Mohammad Halim Khanji. He's been Secretary Government of India, Ministry of Finance. I understand he's with us also in the audience today. And maybe if he has a question, then we get to hear him again. He gave a wider perspective of how things are, how the government looks at things. He gave a perspective of both public finance and monetary finance. How does it work together? He threw the light on that there is a brighter side of the light, and you must not get lost with the current scenarios. There are times, these are only events and not the final destinations. Then we had Dr. G.P. Rao, who has been the former chief of Recon Malaysia and Reliance Group, apart from JK Group, Steel Authority of India, even various other companies. And then he's also Rotarian. He spoke about the human capital, the way human capital is getting enhanced, and how should they need to balance out and grow things up. We had Jayashri Pandya from US on 21st, who has been an author of Forbes and runs a group called the Risk Group as the founder CEO. She spoke about the risks which are entailed in the markets and how things are going forward and how difficult it is in terms of calibrating what happens. She also talked about the scientific discoveries her associations and her groups are doing in terms of mitigating the risks which are here. She spoke about life based on her life experience and how difficult it was being born and then brought up into a family of professors and growing up and then moving to the US and how she strived and the kind of zeal one must have in terms of getting it and not getting lost. Yesterday we had Dilip Chenoy is the Secretary General of FICCI, and he then talked about various issues, balancing the monetary and the fiscal structures. He talked about his own life experiences of growing in the industry, how challenging it is, and how should we take life positively. He talked about the rebalancing of the nature. He talked about the way in Rig Veda we've been talking about, how does it look from the industry, that everything is a sampling in a tree and it grows further, and so on and so forth. So this is the objective, and in any case, we are not going to be switching on the mics and the video phones for the time being. Only when we have question and answers, we're going to do. We're trying to pertain to all the security requirements as outlined by Ministry of Home Affairs to go forward, and hopefully we'll conduct the meeting smoothly going forward. We're just waiting. Let me just make a call again to Dr. Seremi and see if he's been able to connect, and then we can patch you in all. And we're sorry for the delay which is occurred today. Yes, as I said, Dr. Seremi, who is President and Vice Chancellor of University in Iran, is unable to join. He's having some technical problem. His IT people are on the job. He's been a vice chancellor. He's been born in India, Dr. Seremi, and then but he's been in Iran for good 40 years now. When he joins, we will take him for a short while if he joins. Just a second. So Manoj, as I requested, if we can, have a small questionnaire with you, because you have your own experience. You've been editor of the Banking Frontier, which is one of the leading magazines in banking. You have been organizing a large number of events for good, almost, I would say about 15, 20 years. He is also the carver of one of the leading recognitions of innovations called the Finoviti and the Technoviti, which are annual conferences recognizing the potentials of banks, CFOs and CTOs from all over the country and even from overseas now. I've been on their board of jury for almost about 10 years now, and it's been successfully going, and the kind of innovations we see are very creative. Now, today we are not talking about banks, Manoj, as you know, we're talking about life and growth. Although banks do play a very critical role in terms of making our lives smooth and moving forward. As you can see, without liquidity, we find a lot of difficulty in terms of moving. But in my opinion, life is much beyond money or banking per se. What do you think are the key factors which you feel are essential for life and growth?
Thank you, Aman, for inviting. I'm really sorry that there has been this technical glitch. And good morning, everyone, or whichever part of the world you are in, that part of the day. To your question about life and growth, Aman, I see these as two different things, in the sense life is very qualitative and growth is very quantitative. So it's difficult to combine both of them into one answer. So I'll try to separate the two. When this lockdown happened, I realized that for me it was quite a shock, because never in my life have I experienced something like this. Never in my life have I worn that face mask, only seen it on TV and movies and stuff like that. So for me it was quite a shocker. So, for about a week or so, I did what everyone did. Listen to all the available news on internet and TV and WhatsApp and all that, and try to make sense out of it. But I found that it was becoming increasingly difficult to make sense out of it. Normally, one would expect that the more information you have, the more experts you have speaking on a subject, the faster you'll get clarity on that subject, you'll understand the issue. But this was getting worse day by day. And I was wondering what exactly to do about this. Because I have to run a business, I have to run a family, I have to, live life. Life is a career. And one can't live life in a state of confusion without clarity.
True.
It was essential to get some clarity as soon as possible. What I did was I started to narrow down. There are two sources of information basically. One is what is coming from the experts, from the government, from the health experts, from the economic experts and all that. Otherwise, a lot of information was coming to me from my friends and relatives and neighbors and people with whom I have a close rapport. And one thing I found is that the information that is coming from all those people closer to me was much more easier to assemble and digest than what the World Health Organization and presidents and prime ministers, regulators are giving. So I said, let's first start analyzing this easier information that's there with me, the low-hanging fruit. Then what I did was to actually pause looking at a lot of news and information that is coming online, and started focusing on that simpler piece of news. Then I said, personally, about 5 years ago, I started a transformation journey within. Some people take up meditation, some people take up hobbies, whatever else. For me, at the age of 50 or so, it was to try and understand the human mind and the human brain, because this is the only real tool that we have.
True.
And it can, a lot depends. In fact, not a lot, almost everything depends on what the brain thinks and works and does. And to further
You know,
that,
Manoj, you come from the city of the country,
pardon?
the Mumbai, which is, I said, you come from the most hustle bustle city of the country called Mumbai, which is also called the lifeline of, in a way. You know, where you move, you know, elbows to elbows every second of the day, moving in and moving out, using trains, metros, and things like this. So, do you really think the concept of social distancing, that like Dilip Chinoy was mentioning yesterday, that the structure would be MSD, which is mask, sanitation, and distancing? The last part, which is mask is still functionable, sanitation is still functionable, but when it comes to distancing, you know, it becomes very difficult, especially in cities like Mumbai. And I've seen cities across the globe, whether it is, you know, Istanbul in Turkey, or whether you talk of Brussels in Belgium, or you talk of Helsinki, Finland, or New York City in the US and New York. You know, it's very difficult to go about thinking of a life which is going to be with distancing. So do you think life or the perspective of life will change even in big cities like this, with the kind of incidences we are seeing today?
Well, in fact, I believe that big cities are going to be the center of change, because the spread of the virus is much deeper into the bigger cities. Bigger cities are much more affected than smaller towns and villages. And the flow of information is also much wider in the deeper cities. So the fear factor is here, is more in the bigger cities, and fear can drive a lot of change. You know, a lot of requests and a lot of persuasions may not work, but fear is such a powerful tool that you don't have a choice. So if social distancing is going to be the new norm, if wearing masks is going to be the new norm, if sanitizing your hands 10 times a day is going to be the new norm, it's bloody well going to happen, and it's going to happen in the bigger cities in all parts of the world. So that's my answer to your query about social distancing. The day we find a cure to this virus, maybe things may relax. But as long as the fear persists, I think that change in behavior will be there.
You know, you have young children and teen, you know, some in teenage, some in going out of teenage into adulthood. So when they look at life and you see them interact with them, you know, they are the youth of tomorrow. They are the nation builders of tomorrow.
Yes.
Now, how do they see life? Do they see life as money, or do they see life as power, or do they see life as something else? You may agree or not agree, but what is in your perspective, what are they looking at?
For my generation, money was very important. It was a primary goal in education and career building. For today's youngsters, they're looking not at money, but at job satisfaction more. They really want to get into a kind of work that satisfies them. And many of them are searching for that. They still don't know what it is they want, or if they know what they want, they still haven't figured out how to get there. So definitely they want money, but money is not as much as a criteria for them. So lots of students today are okay to take up arts and philosophy and courses like this, which in my generation would have been considered suicidal. I see a lot of people getting into media and media related activities. So today technology is such that anyone can become a journalist of sorts, you know, journalist and everything around being a journalist, posting your own videos and news items and blogs and anything. So if not as a full-time career, but a lot of people are interested in expressing themselves. I will put it that way. And youngsters like to do that. They get the likes that they get on Facebook and Instagram and all that is very powerful for them. Not for our generation, I think, as much, but much more for them. They're just hungry for likes. Whether it's a picture of them wearing a new dress, whether it's a new, let's say, cuisine dish that they have made, whether it is something new toy that they've acquired, they just have to get likes from their friends and community. Otherwise, it's a big disappointment for them.
True, I agree with you. Now, you have, from my understanding, we've been in touch with each other for over 20 years now. In my understanding, you have been studying brain and the way brain behaves, and you have been studying a lot of literature on that.
Yes.
Now, how does one go about measuring happiness? Because, every one of us has a different thing which we look at when we want happiness, or that can bring us happiness. So how do you, as a person, over the last 50 years, 50 years of your existence, 40 years of your 35, 40 years of your professional life, how do you see, what is that brings you happiness in life?
Aman, this is a question that has been asked by millions of people, and it has been asked over hundreds and thousands of generations. So this is like the age-old question. This is a question that everyone wants an answer to: how to get happiness and how to measure it. The more I research on the subject, the more I realize that this is the ultimate question of sorts. Correct? If one can get an answer to this, it's nirvana. You got nirvana. Literally. Happiness, it turns out, is not very definitive. It's like a gas, it doesn't have any fixed shape or form. It's very difficult to measure. But it can be estimated. There's another problem that we use the word happiness that has been used in the English language is very broad. So happiness could apply to a society, it could apply to a family, it could apply to an individual, it could apply to you in the morning. Your definition of happiness in the morning could be different from your definition of happiness in the afternoon, in the evening. Your definition of happiness at home would be different from your definition at office. Your definition of happiness as a 1-year-old kid is very different from your happiness as a definition of happiness as a 20-year-old, and then again as a 40-year-old, 60-year-old. It's a moving target.
What do you, in your opinion, what is that brings happiness to life from whatever you have studied and understood so far?
So again, in different scenarios, it means different things. For example, if I'm really thirsty, water or a soft drink or something to drink is happiness. So that's one very extreme example of happiness. Another extreme example of happiness from the other side is I want my family to be happy. Okay, I want my family to be safe. I want my family to be enriched. I want my family to have a quality life. I want the relationships within the family to be strong. I want a lot of love within the family. So you can already see that at one extreme it is just getting a drink, at the other extreme it is so many other complex things just within a family of 4 or 5 people. And then of course there are people who want happiness in society at large. So Bhutan is a country which pioneered gross happiness, measurement of gross happiness actually. And there are other countries like Denmark and Finland and Sweden which have followed suit. And India has followed suit. I believe central government and Madhya Pradesh government have set up ministries or departments for happiness. Fundamentally, happiness is what we need. And nature has been very kind to us to allow us to get happiness in so many different ways. I'll give an example. Typically, we think of getting happiness by going to malls and cinema halls and driving fast cars and visiting Italy or Spain or Turkey or whatever, visiting international destinations. Now, all these sources of happiness have been cut off. But if you look around, the common man is still happy. I'm not talking of people who lost the jobs or who not have things to eat or who have medical problems. But the common man is still happy. Why is that? Because you have found happiness at home. We have found happiness in starting the hobbies that we wanted to do. Some people have found happiness in talking to their neighbors whom they never met and talked to. Some people have found happiness in having a better relationship with their spouses. So happiness used to be, one definition of happiness used to be that you give your wife a diamond ring, let's say on on her birthday or anniversary or something. Very common thinking among all of us. Today, if you give a flower also, it's happiness. If you can say a poem or a shairi on an occasion like this, that's happiness. So happiness doesn't have to be expensive. It can come from so many sources.
Mhm.
If you can, each of you can identify 10,000 sources of happiness for yourself.
You know,
Guaranteed.
you interact with a large number of CEOs of banks, of cooperative banks, of micro banks, mid-sized bank, large banks, on almost on a monthly basis, not only for your magazine, but also for the events and other things.
Uh-huh.
What do you think that brings them happiness? Because the RBI governor is trying to flush in liquidity into the system. The finance minister comes out and says that the bank manager should ease liquidity and bring in working capital requirements. But that's not happening. And if that's not happening, then are they happy not doing it, or are something else is what gives them happiness as chiefs of banks?
In fact, that is the answer to your question. Happiness is actually not the only thing we want. Imagine a life where someone is happy, 24 hours a day. There is no sadness, there is no anger, there is no desperation. There's all your negative emotions are cut off, and you're only happy. In fact, this happened to, if you look at Gautam Buddha, he was born as Prince Siddharth, and his father wanted him to be happy, to not experience any of the negatives of the world. And this boy was in that palace, beautiful palace, surrounded with beautiful people, beautiful decoration. Everything was good for good food, good clothing, good entertainment. But he was still unhappy, right? He was discontented at least, right? He wanted to see the real world outside. He went outside. He saw death, disease, hunger. Did that make him unhappy? Temporarily, okay? He found happiness by finding the answer to these problems, okay? So happiness doesn't come necessarily from external things only. So a CEO may not rely only on an RBI for his dose of happiness, or the government, or his customers. In times of desperate situations, one has to turn inwards to find happiness. And that's what people like Sadhguru talk about when they talk of inner engineering. So again, I'm saying there are 10,000 sources of happiness. Some of them are outside, some of them are inside. Nature has been very kind to us to give us such a huge list of sources of happiness. Imagine if there were only 10 sources of happiness for mankind, okay, overall. And if 8 or 9 of those were cut off, most of us would be really happy, really unhappy. But given there are 10,000, even the coronavirus has cut off how many sources of happiness? If you have 10,000, maybe it has cut off 500 or 1,000. You still have 9,000 sources of happiness. Be happy that there are so many sources of happiness. In the history of mankind, in the entire history of mankind, there has never been a moment that all sources of happiness have been cut off. Never, not even World War II, not during Spanish flu, not during any asteroid hitting the earth. Lots of people have died, there has been a lot of pain. There has always been alternate sources of happiness. So that keeps me going actually.
Yeah. Before we take up 2 more questions and we open the house for questions for people to come forth, I would like to let you know that Dr. Sarami is still not able to connect, and he says that he will try and connect tomorrow. So we have Ranjit speaking tomorrow, and so from 12 to 12:30, Ranjit will speak, and then from 12:30 to 1, we'll have Dr. Sarami speaking tomorrow. And I hope he's able to sort out this technical glitch today, which was not there yesterday, in fact. Now, Manoj, I see a lot of challenging opportunities going ahead. Before the nation, before individuals, before MSMEs, before small enterprises, before small families like yours, who are doing their bit to contribute to the nation, to contribute to the family, who contribute to the whole society as a whole. Now, how do you, what is that you suggest could induce sustained growth, or what could be done that each one of us at an individual level and at a national level could induce structures or do certain things to induce sustained growth?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Frankly, I would have had a very different answer to this question 5 years ago before I started this journey on brain, mind, happiness, wisdom, and all that. Today, I have a different perspective. So, in fact, I'm not worried about growth. I don't care about growth, literally speaking. What I care about is progress. And there's a big difference between growth and progress. Growth is same thing, more of the same thing, right? If your income is 1,000 rupees a month, it becomes 2,000. If it is 2,000, it becomes 4,000. Progress is transformation. And let me give an analogy how nature does it. So you're born on day 0, and on day 1, you're after 1 year, that baby is typically double in size compared to within a year. So that's 100% growth within a year. But does that make parents happy? What really makes parents happy and what really makes the kid also happy is that in 1 year, it has started to walk, it has started to talk, it has started to have desires other than food, it has started to develop a personality, okay? It has started imitating adults. It wants to do everything that adults do, okay? Walk and run and talk and eat food and play with things, use his hands, everything. That is transformation. So from day 0 to in 365 days, what the baby has grown is hardly anything compared to the transformation that has happened.
True.
The technical word I use for this is progress. So I'm really interested today in progress rather. Growth will happen anyway. Each one of us will figure out how to grow. 90% of it is common sense. So I don't see much of a difference. But if we don't focus on transformation, we're losing out.
I'm happy that you quote Charles Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest and that the growth will come for sure. And that's a very positive note. Manoj, Manoj Agarwal from the very day 1. Maybe the first 4-5 years you don't know yourself. But, growing up from 7-8 years of age to what you are today, you know yourself. Yes. So the meaning of life and growth must have changed from different stages in your life. When you were in school as an 8-year-old or 10-year-old, or as a teenager or 15-year-old, when you took up your first job, and when you, left your job and took up this assignment. And then even while you were doing this assignment in the last 20-22 years, things might have changed as a meaning of what is life for you, how do you see life, and how do you see growth?
Okay.
With your life example.
Okay. Yes, the aspirations have changed a lot over the years. I think every 5-10 years they change. So when I was in school, I wanted to get into engineering college. When I was in engineering college, I wanted to go abroad for higher studies. When I was abroad, I wanted to get a good job. When I got a good job, I wanted to achieve something personally, okay? And I tried various ways to do that. And finally, I landed up starting this magazine, Banking Frontiers. And, this transformation, the goals kept changing. But around the age of 49 or 50, like I said, I realized that I'm able to achieve most of my goals, reasonable goals, okay? But the effort required for each goal kept on increasing. So, as a school kid, I could put in 1,000 years to study, or 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours or whatever it takes to get into engineering. I could put 1,000 hours into preparing for GRE and TOEFL and get into an American university. I could put in 500 hours of work to get a good job, stuff like that. I could put in 100 hours of effort to get a better job into another company. But there's no way I can put it 10,000 hours to do anything new.
But do you see the perspective, the way you look at life and you look at growth from the very beginning of your childhood to today?
Come again, can you repeat the question?
Do you see some change in your perspective?
Yeah, exactly. That is the perspective I'm describing. The perspective is we all have newer goals, each of us, right? But for me for sure, and for most of you, the amount of effort you can put in to achieve your next goal is getting lesser and lesser.
Mm-hmm.
So you simply can't put in more effort at the age of 40 or 50 or 60 to go for your next goal. You have to find ways of achieving your goal more effectively. And then there are two ways. You can use either external help in the form of education or some technology or some guidance or some coach or whatever, or you can do something internally. And I thought so 5 years ago, I started this whole thing of brain, mind, study. That was an internal approach. How can I make my brain and mind more effective to achieve my next set of goals? And that has been good for me in the sense the amount of effort I need to put in for the next goal has become much lesser compared to what it would have been if I had continued my earlier strategy of acquiring a lot of knowledge, of meeting a lot of people, of analyzing a lot of data. It doesn't take me all that effort now to achieve the next goal because I know how the brain works. It's not a black box for me anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I said, last two questions which are there. One is that, we have been seeing new growth numbers coming out for India as 1.9% of GDP expected in 2020 and 7.4%. Do you think they are optimistic, or they are not? They are less as projected? We have much more potential in this country.
The potential is definitely a lot more. The only problem is our measurement system does not measure that potential. For example, all the work that housewives do is not measured as a part of GDP.
True.
If a mother is able to teach her children much better at home, that information doesn't get captured. So I think there are going to be a lot of qualitative improvements in our quality of life. Many of us will have a better quality of life even with a 10 or 20 or 30% lesser income for the next few years. Okay, I'm assuming there's not going to be any runaway inflation or any other kind of disaster that will hurt the quality of life. But assuming more of similar things, the quality of life will improve. The air pollution, for example, is coming down. Noise pollution is coming down. People are talking to the neighbors. People are helping each other a lot. The examples of people helping each other in communities is unbelievable. I mean, Indians were not like that. Indians are pretty selfish most of the time, focused on their own careers and their own aggrandization. But the human side of us is coming out. So we'll have to find new ways of measuring growth and happiness for society, not just India, the entire world. The entire world will have to find out to find ways to include non-tangibles in the GDP.
True. Your advice to the youth and the students?
Okay. I fondly look back at my days in school and college and all the fun I had, and I miss it. Okay. So one advice to youth is that it's very simple. Your youth is your best part of your life. Okay. Don't be in a rush to leave it behind. Cherish the youth. So cherish your youthfulness. Youth is not something in your control, but your youthfulness nature is something that you should preserve as long as you can. And don't try to be a successful adult and millionaire, billionaire, or whatever, and lose your youthfulness in the process. So that is one message for the youth. The secondary message is that in the pursuit of knowledge, you're missing out on the pursuit of wisdom. Wisdom is what made our society. Wisdom was the fuel and engine oil of our society for thousands of years, right from the time of Ramayana and Mahabharata till maybe 20 years ago. These days we've been too caught up in that information revolution and forgot that we had a wisdom revolution or evolution or things like that. So wisdom is a very powerful tool, and we got it thanks to our parents who put some of that within us. But today most of the parents have given up parenting to the internet. So internet has become the parent. Internet doesn't have any wisdom. Please understand. So either you have to encourage your children, the youth, to get wisdom, or
I hope the digital invasion doesn't destroy the whole fabric the way it has been challenging. And I feel that the lockdown has actually world over connected people back to the family systems, to the core values of human life, and trying to understand each other. I'll now open the house for question answer for 5 minutes. I have Professor Junzo Watada who wanted to ask, and then we have some Minta Abbey who wanted to ask a question. Anyone else, please raise their hands. I'll unmute Junzo so that he can ask the question which he has. Junzo?
Okay. Thank you very much for your nice talk. As you know, I'm the Japanese. India is quite an influential country for Japanese, especially our age. We learned much about Indian people, especially Gandhi was such a president, prime minister at that time. So we learned, and especially our educated people are socialists or communists. Many people are like that. So also India was a social country that we learned. But on the other hand, Japanese learned from Chinese philosophy, Confucius. Confucius learned and in 30 years, he finished education himself, for himself. And for 40, he does not worry about anything. And in 50, he understood the order given from the heaven. And 60, he can follow people saying to him the honestly. And the 70, I check the like that. So I'm asking. I would like to asking you, what is the final objective of your life? For long, you talked about happiness in your talking, but how about your target of your life? So we have only 100 years life.
Right.
So in 100 years life, how do you think about your target of your life?
That's a fantastic question. That's a question that most people think only when they are very close to the end of their life. We human beings tend to have a feeling that we are going to be immortal. Every day actually we live as if we are immortal. That tomorrow will be like today, and day after tomorrow will also be there, and there'll be after 365 days also we will be there and doing things in the similar fashion. But each of us knows that we are actually mortal and that we have to go someday. So the first 80-90% of our life is, for most people, revolves around fulfilling their own dreams and ambitions. Each of us aspires for a lot of things, and we are able to achieve maybe 10 or 20% of them. For example, I aspire to climb Mount Everest. I know that's not going to happen, so I keep it aside. So there are all these unfulfilled dreams. But as one gets older and realizes that one is mortal and one has to go, I think the focus shifts from self to society and maybe to God for many people. They really start thinking more in terms of their family or the society or their country or their God. So that kind of conscious change happens. Do I know what my final objective is? As of now, I don't know, because ultimately I'm still not at that stage. I'm still in the stage where I think I'm immortal, kind of, I'm still living as if tomorrow and day after tomorrow are going to be like this. Aman Agarwal will still have another webinar tomorrow and then again day after tomorrow, and you will ask a question. But at the back of our mind, I know that I have to focus on the larger things. I know I believe I can't do much about universe and the world and all that. But I'm trying to get clarity on two things. So my final destination or final objective is to get clarity on two things, which whether I'll get or not, I don't know. And these are the two ultimate things actually. The first is death. Okay, what is death and what is there? What is happening at the point of death and what is happening beyond death, if there is a journey beyond death. Second thing that is really unknown is God. What is God? What shape, form, what are the properties of God? Does he exist in time, beyond time? What does he want? Does he want anything from us? Or he's just created us and left us to enjoy ourselves? Or he's monitoring each of us precisely and there's going to be a judgment day, things like that. Both of these are very spiritual kind of things for which no one has a clear answer. I don't think I'll get an answer, but even the journey of finding the answer, is very rewarding.
True.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very nice, the answer. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
That's a very difficult question, which actually all of us are trying to find out. Before I request Mr. Mathani Abney to ask the question, in fact, I would like to just say that, in the Hindu mythology, we talk of the ashrama of Hinduism, which is a 4H based life stage discussion of structure, which talks about, the 4 stages one has to lead in one's life. I thought I should just add on to what, since you asked about it. And this is the 4 stages are the brahmacharya, which is referred to as the student's time, when you are basically learning, grasping. And there is an age bracket which is outlined for that. And then there's the grahastra, which is household. So you contribute to build up the house, the family, contribute towards it, and you move forward. The third stage in the Hindu mythology life is the vanprastha. Vanprastha is that you're retiring from life. You are taking a sabbatical from life for good, and you want to, now give out to the society, let them lead, but guide them for the time being. And then last stage is the sannyasa, which is the renunciation life, which is when you completely leave the world. You leave your personal possessions, you leave your ego, you leave your desires, your physical needs, and you go into the jungles as a sadhu or a guru, and you go and lead a life of a normal being. That's completely leading away. So, this is an interesting thing which I thought I should bring up, which is based on the Hinduism and the Hindu philosophy of life, where we divide the whole lifespan. And that's why the meaning of life and growth keeps changing from these 4 stages according to the needs and requirements of these 4 stages according to the mythology. Now I'll request, Miss, I don't know if it's Mr. Methan Boy, to kindly ask the question, because the person had raised the hand at the beginning. If we can ask the question, please. I understand that the connectivity is low. Let's request the next participant, Dr. T. Murthy Pandyan, to kindly ask the question. Dr. Pandyan. Dr. Pandyan, can you please ask a question?
Yeah, what will be the scenario of higher education immediately after post-corona, especially in higher education? What will be the scenarios?
Sure.
Ideally,
know about how do you feel that the higher
Regarding the
education will
admission.
change, what will happen now, and how do you see student receiving and teachers discourse happening?
a very good question actually. And India being a young country, this question is very relevant, much more relevant in India than in aging societies. So I see education as 2 things. One is acquiring the knowledge to be able to do a job, whether it's a software developer or financial planner or legal or whatever it is. Other is the maturity of the human being. If you take my own personal journey, I did engineering. Okay, I did a bachelor's degree in engineering, for which I left home and lived in a hostel in Baroda. Okay, so apart from that engineering education, the hostel education, the being an independent person education was a big jump for me. Okay. Secondly, when I did my master's degree in the US, I not only moved away from home, but I moved into a totally different cultural society. Okay. Where the language was different, where the norms were different, where everything was different. And the assumptions, the behavior, so many differences. And I learned a lot from this time I spent in the US, which really affected, both these experiences affected me very positively. So one thing educational institutes I think should do, they should deliberately do, is to impart some kind of cultural maturity as a part of the curriculum. And it could be through teaching of some spiritual concepts. It could be through organizing some kind of teamwork activities, games, leadership activities, things like that. And they should be independent of whether you're studying law or engineering or medicine or anything. Because if each of us do not mature as individuals, then the knowledge we acquire can actually become very destructive. Imagine someone learns nuclear science, but has not been, is not fundamentally trained to be a good human being, gets attracted by vices very quickly. That guy can become such a huge nuisance to society that education should better not have been given. And today, any knowledge, artificial intelligence, law, biology, virology, anything can be used for destructive purposes. So educational institutes have a huge role that they played in the earlier times of shaping human beings to be very good people. And organizations and educational institutions that do that will be the ones that will flourish in the future. Otherwise, you are just a tuition college or a tuition institute. Anyone can give tuition, someone sitting at home can give tuition and give knowledge. But that doesn't make you an educational institute. You become an educational institute of repute when your students grow up and become leaders of society. A lawyer can be a prime minister, an engineer can be a prime minister, an arts graduate can be a prime minister, a PhD in nuclear science can be a prime minister. A very good example is our former president APJ Abdul Kalam. People respect him more for the human being that he is, much more than the nuclear scientist or the rocket scientist that he is.
True.
We definitely need tuition institutes to impart knowledge and just knowledge, but higher institutes of higher education should become institutes of human development.
True.
That is my response, Dr. Muthu.
It's building up of human capital, which is key element, to the whole process, and I think it's going to be very relevant going forward. We have Dr. Sadar from UAE. We'll just check. He had raised the hand before. If he's still around, then maybe we can ask the question. Dr. Sadar? I don't know. I think it's not connecting. So we'll end the session today. Thank you, Manoj, for chipping in. As always, I want to, at the last moment, call you up. And as I said before, Dr. Sarmi would be there tomorrow at around 12:30. From 12 to 12:30, we will have Ranjit Kapoor, who will be speaking. And from 12:30 to about 12:45, we'll have Dr. Sarmi before we open the house of questions. Thank you very much. And we're going to be ending the session now. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate very much.